Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for those that have come here to Cavallo Point, the Healing Arts Center and Spa. Thanks for those that are joining here live via Zoom live feed, and for those that will see us later up on YouTube channel. This is our Tuesdays to Your Health lecture series. We do this once a month, second Tuesday of the month. And this evening, I'm going to be speaking about sleep and what I call restorative sleep, the holy grail for better health. And many of us probably, this rings true for each one of us about how we value our sleep and how it changes as we age. My name is Dr. Brad Jacobs. I'm here at Cavallo Point Lodge, and it's a glorious place. If you haven't been here, please come. In the Marin County, within the Marin Headlands, we're sitting amongst 80,000 acres in the Marin Headlands in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. And we're here in the Healing Arts Center at Cavallo Point Lodge. We run a medical practice here called BlueWave Medicine, and we have a wonderful collaboration with Cavallo Point where we do this once a month. So welcome. Next month, we'll be focused on hyperbaric oxygen therapy for those that are interested in that. And we have a guest, Jacqueline Chain, who I'll be speaking with. We'll do a fireside chat around all the benefits of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So this evening, we'll focus on sleep. So without further ado, not only just to let you know about sort of my affiliations, I run this practice called BlueWave Medicine. It's an integrative medicine, primary care, concierge medicine practice. We have an outstanding team and staff. We have a team of about 15 different providers, acupuncturists, personal trainers, chefs, psychotherapists, a whole ecosystem, as well as other physicians and nurse practitioners. And in addition, I'm involved in an organization called Open Mind Collective, which is focused on the use of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy for the benefit of veterans as well as first responders. It's a nonprofit that we've started. So this evening, sleep. So I'd like to frame the conversation thinking about how do we think about sleep. So I went to medical school, and for better or worse, I went to the most esteemed medical schools around, Stanford, UCSF, and all I learned really was how to prescribe drugs, how to recommend procedures and surgeries for the most part. That's the main stem of how we practice in our conventional medical system for better and particularly for worse for chronic disease. There's so much more out there, hence this integrated medicine, precision medicine, functional medicine models that are really lifestyle forward and really individualized. So this evening, you're going to hear a lot about more of the precision-oriented, meaning individualized to you, oriented medicine. You're going to learn a lot about lifestyle. What can you do yourself? So self-care, it's free, it's empowering, and you can do it with friends. And then the integrated model. So what other people and sorts of therapies might you consider, other systems of viewing how your diagnostic system is made up? So meaning Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, does bodywork help? Might acupuncture help? Might certain herbs and supplements help? Meditation and the like. So there's really a huge, in my mind, when we're thinking about this, I want you to start within yourself. Most people start with, what medication, doc, can you prescribe me? That's fine for the acute life crisis where you're sort of in threat mode, haven't slept for a week and losing your mind. But we really want to start from a foundational place of what can I do within my own self? Much of our sleep disturbance relates to our mind. And then we sort of branch out to, okay, what more can we do? Can we use certain therapies like supplements? Can we do certain things like, say, an acupuncturist that might facilitate? And then move to pharmaceuticals if needed. So I'd love to sort of think about the reflection of what happens when we sleep. You know, we lie down, next thing we know, it's the morning time. We wake up, it's sort of what happened. And when you think about this, I love Professor Dement's quote. He's from Stanford. He's in his 90s. He's one of the founders and grandfathers of the whole sleep medicine movement and field. He said, dreaming permits each and every one of us to be quietly and safely insane every night of our lives, right? Like our dreams can be fantastical. And we wake up in the morning and hopefully feeling refreshed, and we're sitting there wondering like, wow, did that really just happen? You know, those that remember our dreams, that is. So how bad is the sleep problem in the United States? but over at least 40 million people suffer from severe sleep problems. And most people, it's undiagnosed, really undertreated, and people just suffer. And it gets worse as we get older. You can see here the percent of Americans that are reporting sleep issues, really over 70, 80% of people. And a third of them are saying it's every night. A quarter of them are saying most nights. And another quarter roughly are saying pretty often. So it's really a huge number. And sleep, what's so interesting over the decades, we've gone from a sort of a culture where we had no electricity. And when we had no electricity, there was a fire, there were some candles burning, but people were probably asleep a lot earlier, right? People would go to sleep, especially if you had a full day and you're working the land, you're up at 6, done by 6, maybe asleep by 8 or 9. In this day and age, what's going on? Well, we're up at 12, 1, 3 in the morning, like there's 24/7 activity. So over the decades, sleep duration has really gone down. And much of it relates to this peripheral stimulation that's really happening. So I spoke to this around as we age, what happens. So as we go through the decades, what really tends to happen is we get not only less sleep per night, but our architecture of how we sleep, the different phases of sleep that we go through, whether it's the deep stages, the dream stages, or the lighter stages, really starts to shift. And you'll find as we get older, people do more daytime napping as a result, sort of to catch up. So what can we do about it? We'll sort of lead ourselves into that as we go through this conversation. So what are some of the consequences? So we can all speak to them. Maybe I'll ask the folks that are here. When you guys don't sleep well, what do you notice? Moody? Yeah, lack of energy.
Less productivity.
Less productive. Yeah. Did I say moody? So that's the person who said moody. Yep. I don't feel well. Yeah. So what's really interesting is at the physiologic level, we can see these changes. At the physiologic level, we know when we're sleep deprived. So we feel it. And if I were to measure your body, draw your blood, pull saliva from you, look at your cortisol levels, look at your glucose levels, look at your insulin levels, we would see derangements in your normal physiology. So not only do you feel it and know it, but physiologically we can map it. And what does that mean in the long term? That leads to obesity, depression, diabetes, and on and on. Literally, it leads to memory loss. It leads to heart disease and indirectly cancer. So if you think about sleep and its role in our life, it's huge. What I would say that things that are most important to really think about is when thinking about this, when I talk to people, I think about the concept of when you say you don't sleep well, what do you mean? Is it that you have a hard time getting to sleep? Do you have a hard time staying asleep? Do you wake up earlier than you really want to be up and can't get back to sleep? I wake up at 4 and I just can't get back to sleep. And do you wake up feeling not very rested? Some people sleep, they think they sleep solid and they wake up not feeling rested. And for those people, there's maybe a sleep disturbance that might be like sleep apnea, for example, where through the whole night, they're getting hypoxic. So their oxygen levels are dropping. They stop breathing. The brain doesn't get oxygen. They wake up, and this happens multiple times through the night. So they think they're sleeping well, but they're exhausted. And those people, even thin people, can have obstructive sleep apnea. Of course, given how the population has gotten larger and larger in America in particular over the decades, sleep apnea has gone up and up. Then there's the most common one, which is the first two, really, which is I have trouble getting to sleep and or I have trouble through the night and I keep waking up. Depending on, if you're a woman, depending on what decade of life you're in, that could be related an early sign of perimenopause. It may not be a full hot flash, but you are waking up a lot through the night because you're having temperature changes without this full hot flash experience. And then there's the most common issue, which is our mind. The other piece is really, it could be what we eat that evening, right? Or if we go to sleep with a full stomach, We go to sleep and the environment isn't right for us. There's too much light. There's too much noise. We have our phone next to us. We're tempted as it blinks all night long because we don't know how to turn off the notifications, right? So the list is large. But before we go to the most common things, I just want to talk a little bit about the medical things. It's important to sort of think about that. So if you're hyperthyroid, for example, your thyroid's super high, then you're super active throughout the whole day. Your whole system is supercharged. You're not going to sleep well. So that's something important to think about. Some people have pain that keeps them up. So they have arthritis, so they have other pain issues. There's good reasons for it. And also you get sleep disturbances with some neurologic conditions as well as organ-related stuff. So I have heart failure. I can't breathe well. I'm collecting what we call third spacing from our liver, our kidneys, or our heart. And so there's liquid sort of pooling into these third spaces, which then makes it difficult to sleep as well. But most people don't have those issues. The other thing to think about is medications. So some people are taking medications that disrupt sleep. These are important to think about as well. So alcohol is the most common medication that people take. And why do people drink alcohol? Why do you guys drink alcohol? I like it. Yeah. What do you like about it? You like the taste.
And I like the relaxation.
Yeah. And it really, that relaxation wheel. Okay. So what's really interesting, if any of you have any think about using wearables at all? Anyone wear a wearable? Great. What do you have? You have an Apple Watch? You have auto sleep, the Apple Watch? Yeah. So you realize with the Apple Watch, thank you, that if you don't sleep, if you drink alcohol, your sleep changes. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of using wearables, and there are many out there. If you look at the Oura Ring as an example, the Whoop's an example, the Apple Watch as a Garmin. I use Oura a lot, and so for the Oura Ring, there's no question when I drink alcohol, I see disruption in my sleep, right? There's multiple awakenings. I may not even always remember them. I wake up feeling poorly. And I wake up, maybe it's with a headache, maybe not. There's a clear change. That's the most common, quote, medication we use. And what else is there? And other stimulants. So caffeine's a big one. Another, quote, medication that we use. And some of us are, depending on our genomics, will actually metabolize caffeine differently than others. Some are slow metabolizers, some are fast metabolizers. And you can do different testing, such as 3x4 genomic testing, which is a company that I have no affiliation with, but does this sort of work, as well as other genetic companies that will do this, and it'll look at how well you metabolize caffeine. Same with alcohol, for that matter. And then there's these standard prescription drug medications, like beta blockers we use for blood pressure or irregular heartbeat, decongestants. So you have a cold, you take Sudafed as a decongestant, that can keep you up. So let's really keep those in mind, and a lot of people sort of don't really think about those as well. What I recommend, if you can, is connect with a doctor who hopefully you love and trust, and let them do a physical. They'll check your thyroid, they'll listen to your heart, they'll listen to your lungs, and really walk through some of the things we talked about and do some basic labs. But the vast majority of people, it's really related to our minds. It may be related to pain. It may be related to sort of how our behavioral actions, which we'll talk about more. So I want to talk a little bit, shift gears, and talk about different groups of people to fill us in, different research that's been done that's really sort of exciting, I think, that helps fill in some of the boxes of, oh, this is how this works. These are some of the causative effects. So, for example, what happens amongst youth that are sleep deprived? What happens to the mood? So one of the folks in the audience said, I get moody. Everyone sort of nodded their head with the moodiness. And what do we find? So among 11 to 17-year-olds, they studied about 4,000 of these kids. They followed them over a year. The kids that slept less than 6 hours were more likely to be depressed. And not only that, but that sleep deprivation made it harder for them to actually relieve their depression. So it was like this vicious circle. So they were sleep deprived, that made them depressed. If they continued to be sleep deprived, that made their depression even worse. And that controlled for a baseline depression as well. So really, sleep deprivation creates this vicious circle where you're more likely to be depressed and stay depressed. And we'll talk about what you can do about it as we go through the conversation. It also showed us that among a group of folks with HIV, those folks that slept less, in this case under 7 hours, which actually were more likely to be predicted to live less long. So what I mean by that is they looked at this thing, it's called telomeres. Telomeres are these end codes at the end of a chromosome. And so when the cells divide, every time they divide, this telomere gets a little bit shorter. Imagine it like a shoelace with a little cap on the end of that shoelace, that plastic cap. Every time a cell divides, it gets a little shorter and a little shorter. And in essence, gives you an estimate of the age of the cell and how long it can live. It turns out if you sleep less, those telomeres actually shorten more quickly, meaning that the cells are aging more rapidly. So if you've ever had a bad week of sleep and you look in the mirror and you see more wrinkles, you're saying, actually, you're aging more quickly, right? And then you sleep better, you release some stress, all of a sudden your face looks much more glowing, much more alive, much more young. You're seeing this happening in real time. The other piece, so we talked about sort of sleep deprivation and causing depression and that sort of creating a vicious cycle because when people are depressed, it's harder to get better quality sleep. We talked about how sleep deprivation actually affects our ability to have more vitality and maybe live longer. And now I want to talk about circadian rhythm. So some of us like to stay up late. I know in my early, my 20s and 30s, I got super productive from 10 o'clock on, I hit a second gear and I could work till 3 a.m. And then I would just sleep a little bit later. So it turns out the more likely you are to be sort of that person that stays up late, sort of more the owl-like phenomena and sleep late versus go to sleep early and wake up early, you're more likely actually to sleep more poorly and actually also to actually be depressed. So these guys took 250 folks. They mapped them over their circadian rhythm, and half of them were sort of intermediate, sort of normal. They go to sleep between 10 and midnight or so. And then about a fifth would go to sleep super late, like past 1 a.m. And another quarter of them would go to sleep early, 10 p.m., call it. And it turned out the folks that actually were the late night people were more likely to have severe and more persistent depression. And they were more likely to have even higher suicidality and more severe sleep problems. So folks that have sleep problems, I really encourage them. We'll talk about it more later. But if you have problems getting to sleep early, like I can't get myself to sleep, I'm so wound up, it's really time to shut down external stimulation. Right? Usually around 10 o'clock, we move into second gear. So what I tell people to do is use your phone for good. Take your phone, set your alarm so that its sleep time starts at 10 o'clock, 10:15. There's usually a warm down time you could set on your phone as well. Give yourself 45 minutes. The 9:30, the thing charms, you hear it, and then it says, okay, time to get in my PJs, time to floss my teeth and brush my teeth, time to sort of settle down, turn on the lights, light some candles, take a bath if that works for you. Whatever your evening ritual is, read, make love to your partner, whatever your routine is, and get yourself asleep 10:30. You're much more likely than avoid, particularly someone like me, to avoid that second wind where now I'm up to 1 a.m. So I really encourage you to think about these sorts of approaches. So if we were to think about what sorts of things we can do ourselves, we talk about circadian rhythm, and let me speak into a little bit around lifestyle, sort of the sleep hygiene, something called cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. And then we'll talk a little bit about different supplements and herbs we can use and then medications as well. So we talked about creating a bedtime routine and a bedtime schedule. We just walked through. I want to talk about screens. So if you have a television in your room, take it out. If you keep your phone as your alarm clock, take it out. Buy yourself the old school alarm clock. I can't tell you how many people I know that they wake up, they can't get back to sleep, they reach over, they grab their phone, and next thing they know, they're on some social media page, on Insta, feed, right? Or they're reading the news, God forbid, or opening their email, even worse. So remove temptation. It's sort of like a lot of tech companies have done back in the day where they had a whole bunch of food for everybody. The food that was the least healthy, they would sort of put out of reach or behind frosted glass so you wouldn't be so tempted to have your ice cream. Similarly, This is like ice cream for us. Dopamine hit every time we like to touch it and pick it up. So remove it from the bedroom, put it in another room. The other piece, in addition to setting your alarm in advance and sort of allowing yourself to set up that routine, is create a ritual for yourself. And that we're like dogs, like Pavlov's dogs. So if we can create routine, we're going to repeat it and mimic that every time. So if my routine is I floss, I brush my teeth, I run a bath, I get in my bath, I read a little bit, and I go to sleep. If you hit the repeat button on that, then you're much more likely to be successful in getting yourself to sleep and staying asleep. The other thing that people don't pay as much attention to is what are some of the things they do different throughout their routine that then cause changes in their sleep. So I encourage people to journal. I think it's really helpful to keep a journal and notice the things that are making a difference. What to avoid. So ideally you have sort of light close-out shutters or curtains in your room. That you have, if you have sound issues, that you use earplugs. You can even use eye shades that are comfortable and cozy over your eyes. There's a range of different sort of companies now. I think there's one called Chili that has a chili pad that makes these pads, if you will, that go in the bed and they go hot and cold, so you can temperature regulate them. And if you sleep with a partner, they can have their chili pad. They like it warm. You like it cool. It really allows you to. And then layer the blanket so you have a sheet, a lighter sheet, so you can pull and just modulate. Pull off a sheet, pull on back a sheet. You have this cooling device if you like things cool. Really set up the temperature appropriately. So all that stimulation, all that sensory stimulation can really affect people, particularly when they're trying to get back to sleep. So we talked a bit about food and alcohol. And there's nothing worse than eating late. I don't know about you, but for me, recently I remember a couple nights in a row, like my days are going along, like this evening, I'll get home around 8 or 9. And I this time ate before giving this talk, but had I not, I'd go home, I'd make some food, I'd be done eating by 10, and then I'd want to go to sleep. And I can guarantee you I'll be tossing and turning all night as my GI tract is doing all sorts of things like bloating and all sorts of delightful things through the night, right? And particularly depending on what you eat. And same with alcohol, which we talked about. So I really encourage people, eat at least 2 hours, preferably 3 hours before you go to sleep. Really helps go a long way. And then we talked about the environment. And then the other piece, the main elephant in the room, is our minds. And so when we think about, this is sort of done in a more clinical psychological mindset, there's strict behavioral therapy. And we talk about stimulus control, focusing our mind, and relaxation. So stimulus control we spoke about already, like taking the television out of the bedroom, taking the phones out of the bedroom, emotionally triggered discussions that become arguments. That happens, create a cutoff time. Like we don't have conversations that we know are going to be heated or may become heated after 8 p.m. It really sort of creates structure to protect that ability to really unwind. And the truth is, if you just sort of pause for a moment and realize we are so stimulated, it's coming from so many different places. No wonder we're having such difficult time sleeping and moving into that dreamlike place where we can be safely and quietly insane every night of our lives as we dream, right? It's really hard to get to that safe place to sleep when there's so much happening. So to really honor that, respect that's the life we live right now in our society, how we're surrounded, particularly in the Bay Area. And honoring that, give yourself some time to really unwind and take things down a couple notches. There is a formal technique called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's well documented. There's lots of clinical trials showing it's actually equal or not more effective than sleep aids, and doesn't lead to Alzheimer's like sleep aids often do. So cognitive behavioral therapy is this ability to, I don't know about you, but if you have trouble sleeping, have you ever noticed you may be saying things that aren't the nicest things about yourself, to yourself, or aren't the nicest things about how stressed you're going to be the next day and how exhausted you're going to be and how you're not going to be able to perform the way you need to, and the list goes on and on. So it teaches us to recognize when we're saying these sort of harmful thoughts and stop them, and then redirect to the present moment. Because in the present moment, there's actually nothing going on, right? You're alone or with a partner or something like that in a dark room. There is nothing happening, but we project forward and create all these fantastical scenarios. So it's bringing us back to the present moment and then dropping into these relaxation techniques. What I often recommend is if you do the relaxation techniques, you're doing your breathing practice, maybe it's 4 counts in, hold for 2, 6 counts out, and you're doing this sort of approach, then and you notice that that's not working, then my recommendation is you get out of bed. And what I do is I do yoga. So I'll get out of bed and I'll do a yoga practice. So I will actually leave the yoga mat out. The lights are still down. Sometimes I keep a small light on so I don't trip and fall. And I'll do 15 minutes of yoga. Seems like the last thing you want to do is get out of bed and be cold and do that. But actually, it short circuits the mind in all its as it's ruminating. And by getting out of bed, going on that yoga mat, it's again like Pavlov's dog. It conditions me. I'm tense in my body as well. I'm maybe tossing and turning. It opens up all those channels and all that energy and really opens my muscles, my mind, and sort of drains from its running. And then I get back in bed and I sleep like a baby. If that doesn't work, and then I go back to a breathing practice. After that whole circuit doesn't work, I do a breathing practice, I get out of bed, I do yoga, come back, breathing practice, maybe 30 minutes have gone by. Then I just leave the bedroom and go to another room completely and do something very boring like read some history book, or maybe you journal a little bit, or things that aren't going to be super captivating, like not doing email, not listening to the news, things like that. That tends to be really good because then you're conditioning yourself for the bedroom is for what? What do we keep the bedroom for? Why do we have our bedroom? Sleep and, if we're lucky, love making, right? Okay. So I know some people like their own sex rooms, but assuming you can't afford a sex room, your bedroom's primarily for those things. But we use it for all sorts of other things. We work in our bedroom. We watch television in our bedroom, right? So let's try and limit it for really what it's ideally made for. So I sort of walk through this routine already, and I really encourage it. I've done this with a lot of patients, and it really builds a nice repertoire. There's lots of studies. We don't have to go through them all, but there's lots of clinical trials looking at this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's actually a CBT just designed for insomnia. They have one for just depression as well, for anxiety, and for insomnia. And if you haven't done it or haven't heard about it, you can go online. There's online courses now. There's 6 and 8 week courses once a week, highly effective. And this one, it really compared with a 6-month study, and it showed that it was equally effective to effectively the same medication, which is the same as Ambien. There's another study looking at it where they looked at folks with depression and insomnia, both. And this one used Lexapro plus the cognitive behavioral therapy versus control. And you can see in this study, it's a pilot study with 30 people, but you could see here that almost 2/3 of the folks had remission of their depression compared to only 1/3 on Lexapro, right? So Lexapro is an antidepressant. You're twice as likely to, and overall, Lexapro works in about 1/3 of the people. So this combination gave you Lexapro plus CBT gives you double the likelihood of reversing depression. And then look under the sleep disturbance, half of the folks had a remission of their sleep problems by this combination versus essentially, 1 out of 15 in the control group for sleep problems. And again, another study showing the same sorts of benefits. So what I want to bring our attention to for this part of this conversation is really focused on what does it mean to be mindful and what happens in our brains. We have complete shifts in our attention and in our brainwaves as we become more mindful. And though as we drop into meditation, we can drop into these alpha states. Folks that are quite refined in their abilities to meditate can drop even to theta states and delta. But when we're focused on the alpha state, you can just looking at it makes you feel more relaxed, right? So we have a lot of activity going on, and as we move into a bit of mindfulness, we can actually draw ourselves into a much calmer place where we're actually much more present. We're fortunate to work with someone named Tarka Lovegarden, as well as someone else named Bill Dwayne, who are meditation teachers. Tarka runs classes here at Cavallo Point, the Healing Arts Center at the spa here, and they both do one-on-one coaching as well. And I thought maybe we could just take a moment right now and just sort of feel what it's like to do a brief meditation to get a sense of what we're talking about. So if we can, maybe you can uncross your legs. If your legs are crossed, allow your feet to sit comfortably on the floor. If you're seated, I would stay seated. I'm standing. If you're lying, I encourage you to stay lying if you want, though people tend to fall asleep when they're lying and they meditate, which isn't a bad idea if you're trying to fall asleep in the first place. And just allow yourself to relax and just notice your body. Don't actually change anything. Don't change your posture. Don't change your breath. Just notice your body, how it's positioned in the world, in reference to the seat you might be on, or the sofa, or the bed, in this case, the floor beneath me. And just notice my posture, like I'm noticing that I'm a little hunched forward. I'm noticing that my neck's a little tight. My forehead's a little browed because I'm speaking and I'm a little tense. Just noticing. I'm not going to change anything. I'm trying not to judge myself, which is, of course, challenging, but we do our best. And now let's just notice our breath and bring a nice breath in and just see how that feels. So as we breathe in, just take a comfortable breath, filling our belly and then filling our chest, and then a nice exhalation. So you can even hear the breath exhaling. Let's do that again. I'd like to be able to hear it from you guys. Take a nice breath in. And exhalation. So as you're doing this, just notice your heart rate, notice your thoughts. Come back to your breath again. And let's play with it a little bit. Let's, like some of you are already doing in the audience, put a hand on your belly. You can put another hand on your chest. And as you breathe in, let the belly fill first. We call this baby breathing or Buddha breathing. Let the diaphragm drop, let the belly come out as you breathe in. A lot of us breathe the other way. We breathe with the chest, which is actually the opposite way we want to breathe. So allow yourself just to relax the diaphragm, let the diaphragm drop as you breathe in. Let your belly come out. Doesn't look good in a bathing suit. That's okay. No one's looking. And then as you exhale, let yourself exhale as long as you can. Maybe it's 4 beats, maybe it's 6. So let's do that together. We'll breathe in for a count of 4. We'll hold and exhale for a count of 4 to 6, whatever's comfortable for you as you exhale. I like to use something called Ujjayi breathing. It's almost like breathing through a reed instrument with a little bit of back pressure. So to do that, the back of your throat closes slightly. And as you're exhaling, you can feel a little bit of back pressure, and you almost can make a sound with it. So I'll demonstrate as you breathe in. And then breathe out. It'll be a bit of a sound. And breathe in again. And breathe out. Let's do a few more cycles of that. And as we come back, I want you to wiggle your toes, wiggle your feet a little bit. Notice where you are in the room again, and bring your attention back into the space. So just a couple minutes of this breathing practice, and what do people notice? Sense of calm? Yeah. Anything else people notice?
Muscles still not.
Muscles feel more relaxed? Yeah. You're not thinking about anything. Yeah. What a relief. What's that? Yeah, you can hardly think to answer the question. That's beautiful. What I'm noticing, I'm actually receiving more as I'm up here talking. I'm able to sort of be relaxed and feel you guys a bit more as I'm talking. It's almost like the lens has gotten broader, and I could take in while I'm speaking. So everything sort of slows down in a good way. People can get much more clear. You can actually be more productive even though things are slowing down because there's less clutter. There's less parallel processing happening in the brain where you're focused on one task, but at other parts of your consciousness, you're actually processing other things. So you take more of that processing power and put it into what's in front of you, which is beautiful. So there are devices you can use. There's something called like the Muse device. And by the way, I have no affiliation with any of these companies. This is a device that does a neurobiofeedback. So the practice we just did, I love this thing because I remember putting it on my kids, and I thought they were highly distractible, and must have been thinking to myself. And I put it on them, and they immediately scored like 97%. Compared to like 15%. Like all adults probably scored a 25%. And what this does is it sort of it trains you, and there's different ways to do it. But you wear a headband, you have an app. The headband is actually mapping your brain and detecting your brain waves, and it'll do based on the brain waves. The one version. There's many options you have, but it'll sound like a rainforest, and the rain gets louder and louder and louder the more distracted you are, until it just essentially distracts you from your thinking because it's so loud. And then as you bring your attention back and get more focused and calm, then the brain quiets, and then you start hearing birds chirping and a waterfall, like the forest becomes alive, and you hear all these things you didn't hear before. It's a great biofeedback tool. For those that snore, and those who live with partners that snore, I love this. This is sort of an inflatable device. It detects vibration and snoring, and then I see some people in the audience writing this down, and then it'll inflate, and actually the pillow rises as a result, which lifts people up, which changes their palate and soft palate, which creates and sort of upper airway and creates less snoring. Another example of those that haven't read James Nestor's book called Breath, they'll recommend. It's a great book, and it goes into many different domains. But one take-home message was to put a piece of tape, like paper tape in particular, small piece, over your lips. This is a small little piece. Forces you to breathe much more through the nose, which then feeds the whole nasal passages with much more blood flow, which then engorges and dilates. And actually that whole region up in the sinus area in the nose is much like the erectile tissue of a penis or the clitoris. It actually engorges, responds to nitric oxide, nitrates, and as it fills up, you get much more circulation there, much better purification of the air that you're breathing, much more moisture, and much less snoring. And over time, we think it may even change the actually roof of your mouth and the structure of your bite. So that's a book James Nestor wrote that's really interesting, all starting with a little piece of tape over your mouth. There's an app that actually can measure people's snoring. So if you don't think you're a snorer, or your partner's claiming you are, and there's this conversation going on, you can actually this is the one excuse I'll give you. You put the phone next to you for that evening, and then it'll record your snoring and tell you how loud you are, how frequent you're snoring. So let's shift gears a little bit. We talked a lot about what you can do for yourself. And let's say that's not sufficient, or let's say you need the escape valve first and then do some of the self-care, or do both along the way, but you need some more powerful medicine first. Short of prescription drugs, there's a lot of supplements to choose from. I'm a big fan of traditional medicinals as a tea. They do medicinal strength dosing of their teas. A lot of tea companies don't, right? You get the sleep tea, it's not super effective. Yogi tea is pretty good as well, but traditional medicinals, they have a lot of different types of tea remedies. They have a great sleep one. And by way of example, lavender, valerian, hops, passion flower. These are all great herbs that make us sleepy. Lemon balm. They also, some of them affect our anxiety. They also affect our sort of our sleep, like valerian for sleep as an example. Hops makes us sleepy. Lavender's a sense of calm. Lemon balm can help with mostly anxiety and sleep. Melatonin's another good source. Most people use melatonin. I try to tell people to avoid the higher doses, so keep more about 1 to 3 milligrams. Ideally to sync it with actually light. So melatonin is circadian in its pulsation through the day. It comes out at nighttime, right? So if you're in a bright room, taking your melatonin, can't figure, and then turn off the lights and are wondering why you can't get to sleep, you really want to do what I was telling you before, like 45 minutes before, and create your ritual for sleep, turning down the lights, candles, etc. Take your melatonin then to really allow it to have its full effects. We talked a bit about valerian. 5-HTP can be really helpful too for really giving a sense of calm in particular. And lots of different herbs to choose from. So a few different nutrients to think about. Magnesium, great for muscle relaxation, great for sleep, great for constipation. It's a nutrient that often actually we deplete under stress. It can affect many other nutrients as well as energy production. So I'm a big fan of magnesium. L-theanine comes from tea, actually green tea as an extract, one of many of the beautiful things that come from green tea, and gives us a sense of clarity and calm, both. It's a great tea for studying, or a great ingredient for studying. So people that are students, I highly encourage them to drink green tea or take theanine. Really promotes that mental clarity and a sense of calm. GABA and 5-HTP we talked about as well. And there's some great products like Gaia, for example, has a sleep and relax product. You can see in here it has passion flower, valerian root, and a whole mix of poppy, lemon balm, lavender. And then there's other ones like we really have had great success with Cortisol. There's another company called Integrative Therapeutics that creates a product that's similar to this called Cortisol Manager. Really good. Has ashwagandha in it, has phosphatidylserine in it, and highly effective. I've got enough feedback around THC and marijuana that I would be remiss not to mention it in the talk. So I will say a lot of people have actually reduced their Ambien, Lunesta, and similar sort of sleep medication use by using marijuana. And I look at this as harm reduction. It's like taking someone that's not this severe, but an exaggeration would be someone that's using serious drugs, let's say heroin, intravenously, and switching them to snorting it. That's a huge reduction in risk. Similarly, if we can go away from the prescription drugs that have abuse potential and have other problems that may include increased risk of Alzheimer's, and go to things like marijuana or THC and CBD, that's a huge benefit. So we think we get the same sort of sleep patterns with THC and CBD as we do without them. There's some studies showing maybe not as good, definitely way better than prescription drugs. And people do sometimes great with just CBD. And much of the CBD really relates to anxiety, right? So it can be very calming for folks. So some people just do a pure CBD formulation, and it comes in every formulation you could think about. It could be a lozenge, it could be a dropper, it could be a gummy, so you could smoke it. Or they do a hybrid THC with CBD. There's many subtypes of THC as well as CBD, so it can be complicated. The dispensaries actually do a pretty good job trying to help educate folks, and I do recommend that as a potential alternative and use. And like I said, you can get this, particularly in California, pretty much everywhere. So the pharmaceutical industry is large, and it is penetrating. And unfortunately, Ronald Reagan in the late 80s decided to repeal the act that forbid pharmaceutical drug companies from advertising direct to consumers. I don't know if you remember that, but if you were alive then, that happened. And then all of a sudden, they were not limited to physicians. They could directly advertise to consumers. And so we see ads all day long. And actually, for the most part, from almost every pharmaceutical drug company, their largest marketing spending dollars goes towards the sleep industry because sleep is such a huge issue. So what are some of the medications? Many of these will increase our risk of Alzheimer's. So people that take Benadryl, for example, we know it increases our risk of Alzheimer's. Benzodiazepines, it looks like it may increase our risk as well. SSRIs can be activating or sedating. And so people use those for depression, but not necessarily for sleep, although some are used for sleep. And we talked about the antihistamines, which like Benadryl, for example, but we know that increases our risk of Alzheimer's. Using it periodically, obviously much less risk, but still there. And then in addition to these standard benzodiazepines, which we know are habit-forming and cause lots of problems like Ativan and Valium and Xanax, or these newer ones, Lunesta, for example, or Ambien. And they used to say they're not so addicting, but for the most part, people that I prescribe them for and people that I know that use them, they have a really hard time getting off them. I try to encourage people to reserve it to, okay, it's twice a week if you're going to use it. Let's come up with some other plans. Total sleep deprivation is highly disabling. So in those situations, there's a place for it. And then we try and sort of do a robust plan that we've already really walked through to help make it so that they use it less often. So many of you probably heard of people getting up and walking outside naked and not remembering the event, or going to the cookie jar, eating their cookies and not remembering it. There is this amnesia that can happen with people, which can be problematic. A lot of times, actually in the hospital setting, we'll give people a benzodiazepine after something's happened. Let's say they're in an emergency room or during a procedure, and it gives them a bit of this retroactive amnesia. So we give the medication now. Let's say they came with a broken bone and we're trying to reduce their fracture. We're having problems. They're suffering a lot. We're trying to give medication. If we add Ativan or something to it, they'll actually forget the previous half hour, which can be helpful, actually. But then again, if you're out on your own, like a loose lion, you could be eating cookies or walking naked down the street and not quite remember it. So in conclusion, before I just want to wrap up and give some time for questions, there's a huge range of possibilities for sleep. I think the most important ones relate to our circadian rhythm and honoring our circadian rhythm and trying to avoid what I used to do for decades, which was stay up till 3 a.m. because from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. was my most creative time, and it would just wreck me. And really honor that, go to sleep earlier and do that in the morning instead. Circadian rhythms, as I've shown through our talk today, is a huge piece of the puzzle. And then the stimulation and just respecting how stimulated we are in our society and figuring out how you can de-escalate some of that about 60 to 90 minutes before your bedtime. Creating rituals around your bedtime, being sensitive to all the sensory aspects of our bedroom, and then doing, as we bring these rituals together, if that's still not sufficient, really learning new techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy. And then while you're doing all that, in the meantime, while you're still struggling, if that's you, then use supplements, some of the ones we listed here today. Use medications prescribed by your doctor with the plan of trying to arc towards this overall self-care plan. So I want to thank everyone for the time. We've got about 5-10 minutes for questions. And so I'm going to welcome those, and I'll pause for a moment. Thank you. Yeah, so there's... Yeah, so the author's name is James Nestor, and the book is called Breath.
And when you read this book, this is about all about the nasal acid.
Yeah, he talks less about straight up about sleep like we're talking about tonight. He speaks more about sleep apnea and the whole process of what's happened to our upper airways and why our jaws have shifted so much, and and the whole aspects of breath in general, and how people that can, breath hold for so long, and how our breath actually affects so much of our being. It's a fascinating book. It's great to listen to on Audible or to actually read. It's a quick read.
Now, the statement you said about taking a nap, I thought short naps were beneficial. Heard a lot about, getting this 20-minute rest sometime during the day is very refreshing, and actually you're more productive after doing so.
Yeah. So the question about naps, so it's really interesting. Many sleep specialists will say, do not nap. I don't agree with them. I agree with what you just said. Most people find naps quite refreshing. You can get into a cycle where when I nap, I have trouble getting to sleep. And for some people, that may be true. I think what really is happening is people are overstimulated and they're overagitated, and their sleep should either be shortened if they're sleeping for 2 hours from 5 to 7 p.m. and then they try to go to sleep at 9. That makes sense. But if you're sleeping for a shorter period of time, and then actually 6 hours later trying to go to sleep, I think people do much better. And to your point, you can get so exhausted that then you get super agitated, and that leads to really poor sleep and a lot of agitation. So napping is fantastic for those that can. There's many people that can't nap. And what happens often with people when they have struggle with napping is they wake up in a deeper sleep state. So they wake up feeling like a zombie. So Salvador Dali was famous for, he used to nap with a spoon in his hand, and when the spoon hit the ground, he would wake up. And that's when he hit deep sleep. So he'd wake up right before that deep sleep would start, and he'd feel refreshed, So I do recommend people use alarms or sort of set up a guide around so that they're not sleeping super long for those that struggle with napping. And I tell them, just do a 10, 15-minute nap and see how you feel from there. Speaking to the other pieces around for a moment, I didn't talk about exercise. So exercise is really important for people that have disrupted sleep. We hold so much stress in our body. It releases that at the body level. We hold so much in our mind. People feel so much better. It's a mood enhancement. Lowers our blood pressure. We feel much more relaxed and calm, like we felt after our meditation. And so I highly recommend that daily exercise can really help sleep. And then diet we spoke about. So what to eat, what not to eat. And I would pay attention, notice our guts, and notice what foods make me feel bloated. Even if I eat early, what foods make me feel off. That can be a big factor.
Okay, Dr. Rat, this question caught Angela. She wants to know what you think about buying some big bags and staying on cooling bed or an expensive bed, bringing up vibrates so that it makes your head sore.
Great. So, so let's talk about the different accoutrements you can purchase regarding in your bedroom. So a Tempur-Pedic bed, a lot of people like those beds because they're so comfortable. They have this memory foam in them, and people love them. I'm not a huge fan of them personally, but I know a lot of people that love those beds. So that's really a personal decision how well it fits you. There are these beds that will raise and that will help with snoring. In my mind, there's other ways to do that. You could get a big, those big pillows that sit behind, that wrap around, I forget the name of them, that'll pop you up so you don't have to spend $8,000 on that bed that moves up and down. Also, this app I mentioned, or this device, this snoring device app that inflates the pillow itself to manage snoring. The cooling and heating, like I mentioned, there's this company, Chili Pad, I think they're called, or maybe it's just Chili, and there's other companies out there that have these pads that you purchase that aren't nearly as expensive as a bed that does this. And I recommend those that want to manage their temperature regulation in bed. The vibration piece, interesting. I don't know much about it, and so I can't really weigh on how effective those are. I highly recommend people try them out, like go into the store and get on these things and see how you feel, whether you're purchasing a bed or any of these other machines and devices. So let me give you, I've got a couple questions I've had in the past I'll just bring up here. So I don't know anyone that has worse sleeping problems than myself. I've tried so many things. Are the people who just can't be helped? And I would say no. So most people who've tried so many things either have a medical problem that's undiagnosed that needs to, and it's pretty clear which ones we can look at. So that's one possibility, rare, but possible. Or they have, it's the mind, and the mind can be devious, persistent, persnickety, and as clever as you can imagine. And so I would find a contemplative, practice teacher, yoga teacher, meditation teacher, psychotherapist, and really do some deep work to uncover what's going on in the mind. If you do all these practices that I mentioned, it's most likely at a deeper level. That's at the psycho-emotional level. That's how I would respond. I know several people that have had this experience. We have a lot of experience working with people that have sleep problems, and many of them have had great success. Some of them don't want to do the work and don't have the time, don't have the interest or inclination, which is fine. And then most of them stay on sleep medication. So does sleep deprivation reduce the effectiveness and weaken one's immunity? And do sleep disorders exacerbate depression issues? So we talked about how sleep disorders do exacerbate depression. And yes, so there's been some great studies looking at sleep deprivation in vaccines, for example, looking at the immune response and when you deprive, and most of these studies, unfortunately, for better or worse, were done in military vets. They take these young guys, mostly guys, not all, and deprive them and then vaccinate them and look at their titers. And there's huge differences in our immune response, which tells you why people can have issues when you have sleep deprivation for quite some time. People have recurrent illness and sickness, and we already talked about the aging process that happens at the cellular level. So let me do one or two more. How do I sleep better without Ambien? You have to be completely off sleep. Do you have to be completely off sleep aids before you try supplements and homeopathic sorts of things? How do you make the transition without losing a lot of rest? And are there any long-term side effects? Great questions. So you don't have to be off Ambien in order to try other supplements. I do think there's a transition. My preference is what I tell people is do half the dose of the Ambien and then try a supplement. What I also tell people to do is, so give yourself to dedicate which nights you're going to do your Ambien. Let's say it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then the other nights, try using these sleep aids. The only risk is for those, and I had many patients like this they use it regularly, is it's sort of like saying, I'm used to hitting home runs. Now give me something I'm going to hit a single, right? The strength is so different. So I want to set things up for success. So I often will say, do a half dose of your Ambien and do all these other things we talked about. It's like a package, right? We're doing the self-care lifestyle pieces, setting up the room correctly, doing all these other pieces, and then adding the other layers in. And I usually recommend people do this over a month. Like literally the tapering process can take a month. So we really move from, I had one patient who was doing 20 milligrams in Ambien a month. We recommend 5 now. It used to be 10, now it's 5. He was doing 20, not on my watch, but he came in using 20. And we had to do the slow taper to get him down, and we succeeded. But it really required, some focus and his commitment, and we got there. The long-term side effects of Ambien, we don't really know. There are some concerns around memory loss and Alzheimer's, as I've mentioned, with most of these drugs. So those are one of the big things that we all want to avoid. Last question, does sleep deprivation, the second one, I like to have a glass of wine in the evening. How long before I go to sleep should I stop drinking? Great question. Ideally, it's about 6 hours. That's not going to happen. So for most people, I recommend at least 2 to 3 hours. The better way to look at this is just how much should I drink? And I would say ideally limit it to 1 drink. Most of the data now shows that drinking alcohol is not beneficial. We used to think it was, but actually it was some problems with the studies we were looking at. But people do feel a lot of joy and relaxation from it. So what I encourage people to do is select the nights you want to drink alcohol, so there's fewer nights, so you have higher quality sleep the other nights. Use a wearable like an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring. Notice if you have 1 drink versus 3, is there a change in your sleep disturbance? You'll be able to quickly see that, and then titrate yourself accordingly. Thank you for your time. I want to keep things prompt and honor your time. Thank you for being here. We do this. Thank you for coming in personally. Thank you for being here live over Zoom. We encourage you to come every month if you can. Next month again will be Jacqueline Chan speaking about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We'll be in conversation together as a fireside chat, and I welcome your questions and appreciate them and look forward to having you here next time. Have a good night. I hope you enjoyed the show today. We really learned a lot. If you feel compelled and want to learn more, please feel free to go onto our website and subscribe to our newsletter, as well as come onto our contact list. That'll allow you to get informed about future webinars as well as our upcoming retreats, and you'll have an individualized program to get the results you're looking for to optimize your health and your health span. Thank you for joining us today.